Hello, and welcome to another episode of Break into College. I'm your host, Lavetta Jenkins, the Outreach and Wellness Coordinator for Barrier Breakers. Today, we're going to talk about how to succeed at the SAT or ACT and knowing when or if to take the test. This episode is going to cover test prep strategy, test timelines, and test optional decisions. We're also going to get into honest conversation about when a score actually helps an application. So make sure you pay great attention and detail to this episode on how to succeed at the SAT and ACT and knowing when or if to test.
I am so excited for this panel because I'm absolute rock stars. I'm going to give them a little bit of a brief introduction, although I will say that for most of them, I don't think you need introductions to the companies because they're such powerhouses in the test prep space. But first, we have Jed Appleruth. Jed is the founder and president of Appleruth Tutoring Services, a national test prep and academic tutoring services provider. Jed is a nationally certified counselor with a master's degree in professional counseling and a PhD in educational psychology. Jed has researched testing for over 2 decades. He knows his stuff. He has presented his findings at national conferences and published in numerous peer-reviewed journals. Jed's research on motivation and pedagogy has informed the instructional style of the Appleruth team of tutors. Jed is also a trained landscape artist. That's very cool. And he likes playing his djembe and guitar for his two little ones at home. Jed, thank you so much for being with us today.
Great to be here. My pleasure.
And then we have two amazing representatives from Kaplan. Of course, you know that Kaplan is a national test prep provider. They're one of our gold sponsors. But we have two representatives from Kaplan. We have Sasha Fawaz and Sarah Seymour. Sasha Fawaz is a college counselor with 16 plus years of experience. She has helped students gain admission to Ivy Leagues and top research universities, with many receiving full scholarships. She uses her expertise in selective admissions to provide strategic guidance and content that reflects the evolving expectations of top tier institutions. And then we have Sarah Seymour, last but certainly not least. She is the executive director of the pre college programs at Kaplan, where she leads the development of SAT, ACT, and college and career readiness programs designed to help students unlock opportunities and reach their goals. And she has personally been such an instrumental force in helping barrier breakers partner with Kaplan over the last several times and years. She is especially passionate about supporting first gen students with the tools, strategies, and confidence they need to navigate the path to college successfully. Before joining Kaplan, Sarah worked with school districts and colleges across the country to create learning and assessment solutions that expand access and promote equity. She has also taught career development and public speaking at the college level, helping students strengthen their communication skills and prepare for professional success. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. So we are going to get started first and foremost with some questions. And the first question that I have is, how should students decide whether testing strengthens or weakens their specific application? Sasha, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Jed.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Sasha Fawaz, and I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit of background here. I spend the vast majority of my time on the road. I try to go visit the U.S. News and World Report top 50 schools and get through that list about every 2 years. Then I start that cycle again. And I get to sit through lots of admissions presentations while I'm visiting these schools to hear how this has evolved over time. And so, what typically has been the viewpoint since the pandemic has been, well, look at a school's their average or their median score for the previous incoming freshman class, and then if you are at or above that, then send your scores. If not, go test optional if the school allows. Now, there's like two different things to keep in mind though with this now. A lot of schools are now switching to the idea of, well, we'd love if you send your scores, because I don't know if you had a 1300 or if you had a 950 if you go test optional. And so if you're roughly in the area of where our average is, then it'd be great for us to send your scores. Otherwise, we're not really sure where you're at. And so that can most certainly strengthen an application to be able to show that, especially in a world where it is, an A is on A in every single school. And so your GPA, of course, matters. But, I don't know if you went to a school that was easy to get an A or was really difficult to get A in a class. So the test score is essentially the great equalizer. The other thing I'll say is that, especially when you start getting to some more of those elite schools, many of them have flipped back to being test required. There's only one Ivy that hasn't so far. And so that choice of going test optional is almost starting to lessen and go away towards test required.
I agree with Sasha. We've watched the landscape shift from the crazy pandemic times when everything, the whole world was optional. Now it's a trickle, little by little. Every year, about 6, 7 schools come back test required. We just saw Claremont McKenna went in the past couple of weeks. Before that, LSU. Before that, Auburn, Alabama. The big southern state schools, if you're looking at the big state schools, which are very popular these days, one by one, they're falling in sequence. Because they're more selective, more competitive, and now pretty much all, from Georgia to the Florida system. I'm waiting on UNC Chapel Hill. They're going to come back eventually. But one of the things you can look at, and to help you figure out, like, will my test score help me, is the question, as Sasha mentioned. Is it going to be a strength? The same thing, like, do I send an AP score? Like, well, do they give credit? Is it going to strengthen or diminish the application? And that's the question. There are definitely, and the same score will help you here and hurt you here. And so that's the strategy is I'll get the same score, I'll send to 4 schools, I will hold from 4 schools. It's very common using that strategy. You want to look at, the middle 50, as Sasha mentioned, am I close to that? Am I in the range? Or also in the context of your own high school, because it could be you have one of the best scores in your high school, which is still, a deviation or so below the median, but for your school, you did outstanding. And that they can read your application in context of where you're from, your zip code, your school, and knowing that, and also, like, they pull a bunch of kids from the tri-state area, Jersey, New York, but I'm coming from Idaho, and so my 1150 is actually better from this county than so that's still competitive versus that wouldn't be competitive if I was coming from Manhattan. So it's understanding where do you live, how you doing in your school, looking at their middle 50, and also considering the percent of kids who submit scores to that school to give you a sense of how relatively important it is. So if I'm looking at, like, again, like UNC, like 7 in 10, kids are sending scores roughly. And so I know that admissions office, okay, the scores are more common than not, versus University of New Hampshire, it might be 2 or 3 kids out of 10. And so for that school, testing isn't as big of a deal. And so I definitely want to look at the, if you have time, the common data set. You can pull up how many kids send test scores. Is it a majority? If it's a majority, that admission who are enrolled with test scores, then that office probably gives more weighting to the test scores when they're letting in more kids who have test scores. And so those are the factors I look at, and also vis-a-vis everything else. How are my grades? How's my academic rigor? If I have an amazing, my grades are almost flawless, my rigor is really robust, my testing is only, it's average, I might want to stand on the legs of my strongest pieces and keep the testing out of the conversation. So those are the factors. It's like the relative strength of your GPA and your academic rigor versus your testing. Are they aligned, or is there a big gap? And then again, the school, how much they care about testing, and again, where I come from. Even if my score is a little bit lower, it's still going to be good for my region, my cohort that I'm competing against, essentially. My thoughts.
No, that's very helpful. And that really does speak to like how admissions officers are interpreting test scores in the context of that school's test environment. And you're right, how they do relative to the other students at their school, and what's offered to them. Let's talk about the actual test prep situation. Let's say we decide, let's say a student decides, okay, yeah, we're going to test prep. We're going to do this thing. What patterns have you seen in students who significantly improve versus those who are taking course after course or getting tutoring session after tutoring session and they're plateauing? They're not actually improving. Jed, do you want to start with this one? And then, Sarah, Sasha, you can go next.
I feel bad for those kids who just keep doing the same thing and get the same outcome. Now, that's not a happy situation to be in, and hopefully it's not that often. In the grand scheme, there are levels of test prep, and there's self-prep, and now there's a lot more available. The Blue Book app, the College Board is pretty robust with Khan Academy. There's definitely self-prep. Then there's the groups, then there's private tutoring, and then there's like elite private tutoring. There are like all these levels. And self-prep could be, with a book, it could be with an online system. They're going up the chain. And as you get more personalized, it does get a little more expensive. And being mindful of, resources, time, all those things. In my experience, the big groups can get you, you're covering the middle. You have to cover the middle typically. unless you're like in an advanced group, but it's still, they're teaching the whole curriculum versus individual tutoring. It's what did you miss? Why did you miss it? What are your specific shortcomings? Where are the holes in your skill set versus here's the whole curriculum. So the one-on-one stuff is more efficient. Obviously, it has to be, but it's also the balance of cost and resources. The things that make it effective, in my experience, it's the things that you miss are the gold. Whatever you're missing, that's where the gems are. And Sasha's taught this for many years, myself included. If understanding why a student missed number 15, why they chose B and they didn't choose A or C, or what they missed in the question, what they missed in the answer choices, it's getting into the mindset of the test writers and getting the mindset of the student of why you fell for this thing. Or it's simply you don't understand fully this algebra 2 concept and you're rusty on that. And we have to rebuild the actual, or this grammar concept or this reading notion. So there are gaps in skill, or you're going too quickly, you're not writing things down in a structured way, you're too speedy, you're being careless. And careless errors kill you on the SAT now, where the easier questions actually count off more in many cases than the harder questions with the item response theory, with the score of the new SATs. Everything doesn't count the same. It's like you don't want to miss easy questions on the SAT now. And you want to pace yourself. On the ACT, everything is one question, 1 point, but not the SAT. The things have shifted with the scoring. So practice tests matter tremendously. And then not just taking them. Some kids just take a bunch of them. It's stopping, reflecting, going back to everyone you missed and why did I miss it? It's that reflection piece, which is the gold. It's that metacognition of, oh, I see why I'm missing these kind of questions. And there's a pattern here, not just keep taking practice questions. Stop and reflect and understand why you're missing it. The why is the essence. And then you build things up. So spreading it over time is key. Like don't cram it. Cramming doesn't work. Giving it time for practice, for reinforcement, for forgetting and relearning. Having 3 official tests is really important in my experience. Some kids are one and done. Most kids keep getting gains through the 3rd one. And most schools are super scoring, ST especially. So, the grand scheme of things, you pace it, you choose the path, and some kids combine it. They may do a Kaplan group, then they pivot to a private tutor or with Apple Root or some other company. And there are ways of, like, I love getting towards some of the really fine tuning, the highly personalized stuff. And then maybe you do a big exposure to the full suite of content and then really hone exactly what you missed and why. And some kids can do that with self-prep if they're really self-directed and disciplined. But some kids do better with tutors, which is why we exist. But yeah, so that's kind of the broad scale. But you want practice tests, you want more time on task, you want the reflection and really studying the errors. That to me is all critical. And going slow and structuring your work so there's fewer careless errors.
Sarah?
+1 to everything Jed said. It is those students who have reached a plateau or have gotten almost to their goal score. It's usually not going and relearning content. It's really getting to the why, not the what. So students who plateau might just be doing more and more and more, taking more practice tests, maybe drilling only their weaknesses, but it is really looking at where most prep you're using will have pretty in-depth like answers and explanations. So understanding and being able to understand patterns of your own weaknesses and also still practicing where you have strengths. Those areas are important to keep strong, keep sharp. You will be leveraging those and you can be really efficient in those strengths. But it is really the deep analysis of why you're getting something wrong, which might unlock success on a number of questions if there's just one little tweak. So really looking deeply at the why, not just the what, and continuing to sharpen areas of strength while really remediating in a really personalized way those things you're not quite there yet or a little weaker on. So Sasha, in your experience, I don't know if there's anything to add there where you have seen just like what's like a one little light bulb trigger.
Yeah, I will just say, when I was in high school, I was a student who was, when I first had taken the SAT, I was far below the national average. And then 3 months later, I was a National Merit Scholar. I didn't have any money for prep or anything like that. I couldn't even buy a test prep book. I used to go to a place that used to exist called Borders Books, where I would like pull out, it was a Kaplan book, actually. That's how I had first heard of Kaplan, and prep from a book. Here is the thing that I did and that I know and that I help students with now when I teach classes or if I'm tutoring those students on ACT or SAT. Number one, the test is highly predictable. It can't be really different from the summer versus the fall, or college wouldn't be able to use it for admission. So use that to your advantage that it's a highly predictable test. Number two, I think one of the most important things is if you have a student who can get to the point where they can articulate very clearly where their weak areas are. And it's not like, oh, math, I need to work with math, the hard math questions. That's not going to do it. You want to get to a student to a point where they can say it's advanced math problems. What within advanced math domain, which is one of the SAT domains, nonlinear functions. Great. Even if you're going to College Board, they have a bank of over 10,000 free questions for you to use, and you should be practicing them over and over and over until the point where you're sick of it. You should be able to do like 40 nonlinear functions questions and just say like, okay, I got it. I've seen this question before. I know how to do this. Great. That means that you're going to get a really good score. So you really want to be able to use the predictability of the exam to your advantage and just practice the heck out of those questions that you can articulate you need the most work on. And again, with all the resources that are out there, you will not run out of practice questions, but you got to do it and you got to spend the time reviewing those answers and explanations, even of the ones you get correct. Because that's the thing that students sometimes ignore is that, well, did you get it right because you guessed? Did you get it right, but maybe you didn't do it in the most efficient way possible? And you actually could have saved some time if you would have done it in a different way. And so it's really intentional prep and being able to articulate very minutely the things you need to focus on.
I love that. And I love your anecdote about Borders because I was also that kid. I did not know I didn't know anything really about the SAT, PSAT. I mean, I took the PSAT and I didn't pay attention to it, so I did not do the National Merit Scholar. I did not do that. But I remember I got some score. I don't even remember what score it was. And I remember thinking, it seems like a good score. I don't know. And then I heard one of my friends talking about how she was stressed because the score wasn't good enough, and her score was way higher than my score. I was like, oh, maybe I didn't get a good score. And I took myself right to Borders, and got a book. Did not know we weren't paying for test prep, so got a book. Had my little Borders rewards keychain, my red Borders keychain, and that book was the thing that helped me get to it was a high score, something like 1520 or something, is at a 1600 at the time.
Right.
But I had me, it was me in the book,
That's
because
awesome.
my parents didn't know anything about the whole process. So I really resonate with your story. There is a question that before we go on, I do want to ask because it goes into the super scoring question a bit, but there's a parent that wants to know what kind of student is best to take the SAT or the ACT, and how can a parent assess that? And I will also say that it's been fascinating to watch this question evolve over the years, because I'm on the East Coast and we didn't have the ACT for a bit. But I just want to hear from you guys. Sasha, if you want to start, and then Jed. Yeah, what kind of students best to take them? How do you assess that?
So is the question taking the ACT versus the SAT?
Yes, I think that's the
It
question. What
was
kind of
what kind of
student?
student might do better on one or the other, which is the
Yes.
question we always get.
Okay, got it. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
here's my take. I have been a professional educator and licensed counselor for a very long time, both in Michigan and in Illinois. And here's what I have noticed is that you need to see if you live in a state that requires all students to take the ACT or the SAT. And if you are in a state, I'll use Illinois as an example. They have recently flipped to ACT. If you're a student who's in a state like that, then it is very likely that the curriculum at your school has been kind of changed, massaged a little bit to make sure that your students are doing well on the ACT, because that's the metric that schools are held accountable to, teachers, districts, all of that. And so, I mean, just from seeing in Chicago, I'll use Chicago as an example. A lot of the curriculum was geared for the SAT before. We switched to ACT. Now it's more geared for ACT. And so you are going to be likely to do better on the exam of what your state is prepping you for. And so check to see if you are in the state required type of situation. Is it ACT versus SAT? But one other thing I will say is you don't need to guess if you're going to be better on one versus another. You can take a practice test of the ACT versus the SAT. Those scores are totally different, but you can look at your percentile rank and see, okay, I took a practice ACT and I was in the 70th percentile, but then I took one for, the other test and it was a higher percentile. And so just know that you can take a practice test to see which one you do better in. But first check to see, if you're in a state required situation, because it might lend you to be better at one versus the other.
Jed, anything you want to add to
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. It's a question, a very common question. And yeah, where you are will determine, is there more prep for the ACT or more for the SAT. Though globally around the country, the SAT is a much more dominant test. You have like over 2 million kids taking that versus 1.4 million ACT. So ACT was the dominant test. They kind of lost their mojo some. They're trying to claw back with their new short 2-hour, 5-minute test and make science optional. But in my experience, like there are differences. Like the SAT gives you more time per question. The ACT is like a 9th grade level of reading, a little lower level of reading than the SAT. The math on the ACT is much broader, a lot more concepts, more deeper into Algebra 2, deeper into stats, deeper into other, versus the SAT is heavy into algebra, but a lot more of these multi-step, like harder problems. And so it's a different student. It's hard to tell exactly. Like there's more geometry on the ACT, less on the SAT. All these nuances. There's less grammar now on that. In the verbal section, it's really more reading comp, less grammar. The SAT, for the ACT, you have both an English and a reading, and so there's a lot. 2 out of 3. If only if there's no science. In the grand scheme, as Sasha mentioned, the only way to know is getting a good, reliable practice test under your belt for both tests. And now they're so short. A few years back, the ST was 5 hours. ACT with the essay was 4 hours. It was a long time. But now, 2 hours and 14 minutes, test time, 2 hours and 5 minutes. You could bang it out in a weekend or 2 weekends. And the College Board, they have, 7 or 8 good tests online, the Blue Book. And the ACT, they have 1, but Kaplan offers them, Appleworth offers them, and they're free. We offer everyone a free practice test. And then you compare them, look at the percentile. So that is the gold standard. I'm trying to tease out, well, my kid's better on this, or he has learning disability, but extra time. It's tough until you give them an actual practice. In the abstract, who knows? But again, get away from the abstraction and give them each a test within proximity. Don't do it like 12 months apart, because there's some development and growth. Like the PSAT is now 7 months old. I'm assuming kids have learned something over the past 7 months in reading skills or grammar skills. So make sure the PSAT is a good proxy if you're like a month apart. At this point now, have them sit for 2 hours and 24 minutes on a Saturday or Sunday and get a current new baseline compared to the other and look for the percentiles. Our heuristic is more than a 60-point difference on the SAT, go with the stronger test, independent of preference, because you have like 30 points of error on each test, the standard error of measurement. So beyond that, you actually are better. And you could take it 5 times in a row and you'll probably do better on that test, given your strengths, your abilities, and so forth. So yeah, practice test, baseline practice, and unprepped baselines are the best. Go in there and just take it cold before you put energy into prep or a prep class. Just go and get a good clean baseline is the key.
And I'll add too that there are some format differences. We can really get into the nuance on the ACT. Science is now optional. All SAT test takers are going to take a digital test. For the ACT, there is still the option to take a paper-based test. So both will have accommodations. If your student, if your child, if you have accommodations for test taking, the digital SAT is entirely digital, and the ACT has some flexibility in format and still offering a paper version. And so also offering the science section now as optional gives you a little bit of flexibility to say the core test are these subjects, yet I'm going to major in a STEM field, or I'm going to a school that is, a highly math focused or science focused. So taking math and then choosing to take science will give you a math score, and then it will give you a STEM score. So there are other pieces of that with the new enhanced ACT that also change maybe the way you're looking at both tests, the format, what you're testing, in line with the best advice is to take a practice test of both, like Jed and Sasha have both said. But understanding maybe where you're intending to major, the school you want to apply to, what that college requires, where your science and math interest or level might be, could also be a way to determine which test might best fit your strengths.
And we tend to like the paper ACT. For a lot of reasons. The Blue Book app, they invested a lot. The College Board puts money into the user experience, user interface. It's pretty smart, pretty savvy. But Pearson's test nav is a little bit clunky still. There are some issues with, and also doing the science section on the screen versus in the paper, with being able to measure and do all these tricks. So if you have the choice, take the paper ACT until they either price it at half the rate or they force you. The College Board just pushed everyone digital immediately, and for security reasons and other reasons too. But yeah, I think the paper ACT is going to be your better option for most kids in our experience with the current formatting of the TestNav interface.
And we do have a question that came from the audience, but actually it goes right into the next question I was going to ask anyways. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about super scoring, right? Which is, and I'll actually let you guys explain it. Like, what is super scoring? And what are some common misconceptions about super scoring or taking multiple test attempts, which goes into the question, like, how do schools view multiple repeated test scores? Is the student required to submit all scores? Will they see a much lower first score? So all things super scoring. Jed, we can start with you, and then
Sure.
I'll kick it over to Sasha and Sarah.
Yeah, super score, pretty simple. If I take the March SAT, get my math score, I take the May SAT and I get my verbal. And then they're going to use my best score here, my best score here, and then boom, that's the one they use in committee. It's very simple. The majority of schools super score the SAT. You can pull up on College Board Big Futures. It's very easy to find out the super score. And many more schools now super score the ACT. For several decades, they said, don't do it. We don't believe in it. Then they did big research a couple years back and they said, oh, it's actually the better predictor of freshman grades, super scoring. So now they're saying super score, please do. And more schools are super scoring the ACT. And a very small handful will super duper, like, they'll take the verbal from one. That's like test flexible kind of stuff. Very rare. Only a few schools do that. But yeah, super scoring, because of that, there are going to be slight variations in your score between one test and the next, even without actual growth or gains. If you guess right or wrong, if you have one careless error on a really easy math problem on the SAT, that could drop to 20, 30 points. And so things like that are the reason why taking it more than once is to your great advantage. And there also is some net gain. With every iteration of an official test, you're going to gain typically a little bit of confidence, self-efficacy. There is some natural growth by taking it a few times, even without big prep, just because you're getting more comfortable with it. And so taking it more than once, very smart. And especially with that, there's slight, it could be also, there's a passage on the ACT that really stumps you. And then, you were prepped, but there was a really tough passage versus on the next test, there was one you took, this book I read in class, and you crush it. And so there is variation in the content. There's variation in the luck and guessing right or wrong. And there's also there's some differences in terms of the scoring from one test to another. It's slight, but it's there in terms of equating different tests and how different things they kind of. So for that reason, take it more than once, and they're going to take your best and combine it in when they look at your score. Sasha, what are your? I'm going to add on to that one.
Yeah, I'll just add on a couple things. Number one is whenever you're registering for the ACT or the SAT, you have these free score sends that come with your registration. Now, a lot of students want to put their schools on there, and I understand because, again, it is totally free to do that. But if it is possible, and I know this is like a totally privileged take to say, I would not put the schools on your registration before you've actually taken the exam and see what your scores are. And so kind of one of the questions that I see kind of floating around here in the chat is this idea of like, are they going to see how many times I've taken this test? The answer is no. However, right? So number one, if you can get away with it, don't put those schools right away. Wait till you see what scores it is you actually want your schools to be able to see. Now, once you could take the test 10 times and they could only see one if you only send one of those scores. So it's not like they're going to see how many times you've taken this test. Once you've taken all of them, you feel good and you're done. Then when you actually go to do College Board or ACT score sends, you'll be able to see what schools are super scoring and you'll be able to choose which exams to show. So schools will not see all of those. There's one other thing to say, and this is coming from a guidance counselor perspective, is that as a counselor, I always see when the students are taking an ACT or an SAT exam. So I will see those, and we get sent these like stickers that we put on your transcript. Make sure you've talked to your guidance counselor, because sometimes it's just kind of automatic, like, oh, let me go ahead and throw this sticker on there and then like ship that off. So make sure you say, hey, like, I only want this sticker and this sticker, because you do an official score set, yes, but a lot of schools, their transcripts automatically will have those stickers on there that show your ACT and SAT scores. And so then a school would be able to see all your different administrations or some of the lower scores. And so again, you have a lot of autonomy of what scores schools see if you control not putting any score sends, the free score sends right away, and checking with your guidance counselor to make sure what is actually represented in your transcript.
Thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, so many questions. We're gonna do a lot of things. I think this is such an important conversation too about how many times you should test and the best way to test. I want to actually start with Sarah for this question. When does continued test prep stop being a good return on investment? And then, we can go to Jed and Sasha if you want to add on.
Everyone is so different, but if you're testing and testing and testing and have really focused on those areas of weakness, can explain verbally what those weaknesses are, and you're not seeing the score change 10, 20 points, maybe, it could be time to pivot. So spend your energy in other places. Focus on your personal statement, really focus in on your leadership roles. So a perfect score isn't like your magic wand. Once you're in the ballpark of your dream score, just remember that your whole application is really important. And SAT, ACT score, and AP, or I'm sorry, and GPA are what people think about automatically in a college, admissions journey. But there are so many other pieces to your holistic admissions package. So if you're taking practice test after practice test, scores aren't moving more than 10 to 20 points unless you have access to a one-on-one tutor who can really help you specify and hone in on those 1 to 2 things that might just be aha moments. If you're finding yourself in that 10 to 20 point range after taking multiple tests, then focus on another part of your application. But Sasha and Jed might have some good other feedback based on working directly with students.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah, we are totally in alignment on that one. And like people think that these nuanced differences are more important than they actually are. Like going from a 1500 to a 1530, like it's 1 or 2 questions. It's not going to make a difference in terms of how you do with this college. Like, 1100 versus a 1350, that's a meaningful difference. But people think, if I just get this a little bit higher, for the schools that care at that level, they're, holistically, as Sarah mentioned, there's so much more. Like one of my best friends, his daughter is a junior. She's applying to Vandy. And I was looking, their middle 50 is a 34 to a 35 on ACT, but not half the kids send test scores. But even then, if you're applying to a school that's that selective, the regularization rate that came out was 2.8% and early is 11. So all the test score and the grades by you for that school is a lottery ticket, essentially. And perfect essays, all the rigor, great RACs activities, and every 10 kids, they're gonna pick one. And they're all pretty strong kids. So at that point, like trying to that nuance of I got from this to this, so 15, that it's not going to be the difference, honestly. And thinking it is, you're kind of going to make yourself crazy. In my experience, you see gains through the third test for most kids. And after that, most kids hit a plateau. Most kids begin to get tired. My other good friend, all my friends are now like they have 18-year-old kids. They're after 3, his son is like, I'm done. There's no more left in me. I put the time in, the practice test, I'm finished. Occasionally you see a gain on the 4th, but oftentimes you hit a plateau or even you start to decline because you get burnt. And say, there's other things happening, there's too much going on. If you're doing prep in earnest and you're doing practice tests and you're reviewing your stuff, three official tests is kind of the gold standard, and occasionally a 4th. Kids taking it 10 times, they're doing something wrong. Like they're not, and there's some more to life. And like, what, come on. Enjoy your high school career. But if you're using practice tests, you don't need more than 4 in my experience, unless there was some massive anxiety event and you had things happen and there was a big change, or the kid's on a beta blocker now. Every now and again you see a change in the 4th. But typically, your plan should include 3 official tests, and if you get the score you need before that, you're good. But yeah, don't keep hitting the same note again and again. You got to get off that and do other things. You got to live, man. Seriously. All right, Sasha.
I have nothing to add to this. I'm just like, just it's bringing me back to an earlier time. I went to University of Chicago, and then now I'm a student at University of Michigan, and it is just full of students who try to take it a million times, like move by 1 point. Even the admissions officers are like, stop with this, because they keep like what will happen is that students will submit their application, then they'll have more score sets that they're like using to retake this exam, and they're just like, oh my gosh, like is this? I hope this person like literally has a life. I hope this person's like mentally stable after all of this. So even these like excellent schools are trying to tell students I'd say three is a great number. Beyond that, you're probably having something else suffer that could actually help you with your application or just your general life happiness.
Well, and that goes directly to the next question, right? Like, how do students balance test prep with maintaining strong grades and all their extracurricular activities? And, how many months are we talking about? Is it all of junior year, all of sophomore summer?
Hopefully not.
Sasha, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I would just say I think one of the ways to make this feel like it's balanced is to have a time and a place for test prep and an end date in mind of when you're going to do it by. As soon as you start thinking it's like all of high school, like I have to take the PSAT 8-9 and then the PSAT NMSQT and like it is just always SAT prep, then you're gonna like lose your mind, seriously. But if you think like, okay, I've got these 3 months, these 4 months where I am prepping, here's the practice tests that are spread out, here's the exam I'm going to take, and maybe here's the retake date, and you can see what is that path that you're going to do, when is the end date, that is going to make things feel much more manageable. It's when students take this exam early, which there's nothing wrong about taking it early, but then they think, okay, well, that means I have 5 more opportunities to retake this test, then it's something that's forever going in your mind and taking away from the things that you need to be spend time doing and enjoying, whether that's your activities or your supplemental essays or all those other things. And so my number one recommendation is like know exactly what your timeline is, and then your brain knows it can be at ease, before and after that time.
Jed, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, I like having a testing season and looking at the calendar and understanding when your life is crazy. If you're the lead in the play or you're a varsity debater, and this whatever that you're a traveling athlete and this is your intense time, don't put test prep in that little window because junior year is intense and it is, and these days it's hard. These kids are working hard, but trying to find the spot that's relatively lighter in that year. And for a lot of our really highly scheduled kids, a lot of APs, a lot of IBs, it's the summer before they start that they actually get in some of the big lifting. And then they can fine tune later in the year. But like the big content lift happens if they're taking a very rigorous schedule. And a lot of kids are these days, 4 APs or four, whatever it is. So look at the calendar, understand, and don't double up, in my experience, like the May, when you're in AP week. I don't like kids who are prepping hard. Y'all agree with that? That should be just the APs. Don't double up on test prep in that little window because you'll make yourself crazy and you can't give it the attention. And also now there's so many more options like the summer prep. You want to have your strongest score before that ED. Like you're going to be applying October 15th or November 1st. You want testing done by that for ideally. You can always fine tune after that for your regular apps. But for your ED shot, you're swinging for the fences. You want your best scores. So that means you have to end by the September ACT or the SAT to make sure it's finished. Every school has their drop dead dates for testing, but that's a good safe place. So you want to finish by then. And ideally you have your 3-pack of your, some kids are done after 1, some after 2, but a third one, that should be, the planned date, as Sasha mentioned, this is where it ends. And this is whatever I got, then we're sending it. That to me makes plenty of sense. And it shouldn't be like looking at like a 10-week period of prep and then a little bit of fine tuning for other tests. But like there's a big lift at some point where you're meeting every week, either in a group or with a tutor. You're doing a practice test every few sessions. And after that ends, then it's fine tuning. And the burden goes way down. If the kids who are still taking it again, like for the March test, it wasn't the like level of prep, or if you're doing an hour and a half session, 2 hours becomes an hour session. Like the review, everything shrinks on the following tests, not the same level of keep going at the same heavy rate for that first test, in my experience.
Good. I really love that. I think that it's something that we really try to get our students, especially if they come to us early, to maybe think about doing those diagnostics at the end of sophomore year, or really doing a lot of heavy prep sophomore summer, and then taking the junior fall tests because junior year is crazy.
It's a hard year.
It's a hard year.
And it can be overwhelming. And to Sasha's point, it can be overwhelming if you just look at it all together. And I find thinking about, like Jed said, a testing season, scheduling a test or knowing what test date you're working from, and other deadlines, and working backwards. So if you work backwards, it really helps break it down into manageable pieces. And during that time when you're working backwards and you have that window, essentially planning like you have a new part-time job, right? We all say it, we all know it, we've all learned it painfully, but it cannot be overstated that cramming is not best practice. Cramming is not learning science. Working backwards and being intentional and essentially saying, test prep for this season is my part-time job. You're not going to get your 20 hours of a part-time job all in on a Saturday. It is spaced practice. It is a learning best practice, and it's easier said than done. But if you're intentional, and you break it down into manageable bits and know that during this season you've essentially got a new part-time job or a new lead in the play or a new varsity sport. It is not just the test that's stressful, but your time management too. So as much of it in prep is time management, as it is the concepts, learning the mechanics of the tests and learning strategy, which I don't think we've necessarily spoken to here, but testing strategy is a big part of test prep, not just focusing on the content. At this point, you have learned the content that is tested on the test, right? It is strategy, and it is time management, and it is focus, and those are some of the things I think that get lost in looking at test prep and skilling and drilling. Going out a bit and just in looking at, these are general skills as you're learning to test prep, and manage your time and space your practice, and focusing on strategy and digging into a why. That's going to help your learning everywhere. It's going to help your learning in your AP class. It's going to help your learning in college. And these are just readiness skills that focusing in on either SAT or ACT prep apply to so many other things in your academic life and success.
I love that. And I do have a final question, and I want to make sure, actually, that each of you kind of share a little bit about what you offer at Appleruth and what you offer at Kaplan, because I think that's really important. But to your point, Sarah, we didn't talk a little bit about testing strategy. So is there anything, Jed or Sasha, you wanted to add that we didn't talk about in terms of strategy?
I mean, it's going to be specific to, the test and then the subject matter in terms of the way you approach science, and reading is going to be a little different than the way you approach the passages for, for the English. Everything will have its own strategy in terms of how you set up certain math problems. And definitely there are going to be certain skill deficits. Some kids are going to struggle with this comma thing or a parallel structure, or there are these inference questions, certain things they're going to miss. That's, actual content, but then, optimizing the way you're approaching it, the way you're setting up the work. There are definitely some of the, making sure you're using Desmos very thoughtfully and skillfully. For the SAT, you could solve this way with the blunt force direct way, or you could back into it using your graphing calculator. And so there's always strategy to help you optimize that. And time management, as Sarah mentioned, is critical, especially for the ACT, which is still speedier than the SAT. But yeah, I think it's a balance of the content, the actual material, and your approach, your strategy, your timing. And then there's the mental game too. There's as Sarah knows, as a counselor, some kids do come with some anxiety, and they kind of lose their center if they miss a few problems. Learning self-regulation skills, self-management skills is also part of that test day experience of bringing your A game for a stressed, higher stakes experience. How do I stay focused and optimal, even if I miss a couple? Still cool and collected. How do I practice that? It's also part of the experience of learning how to do well on the tests.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I definitely know that we could keep talking about testing for such a long time, but we will have both of you, or all of you, hopefully back on either a podcast or a YouTube or a blog, because we want to make sure that our entire audience knows about the resources available both at Appleruth and at Kaplan. Jed, Sasha, Sarah, this was amazing. Thank you so, so, so much. We are so grateful to have had you.
To find out more about this topic, visit the companion blog on barrier-breakers.org.